presentation.
Okay.
This meeting is being recorded.
Got it.
Perfect. Okay, well, welcome everyone. We're going to get the presentation up here shortly. I'm Dr. Sue Howell from Thrive Holistic Veterinary Care, and I have the pleasure and the honor of introducing Dr. Liz Cutright with Healthier Pets Naturally in Illinois. Dr. Liz is a mentor of mine. She's been doing nutrition response testing for, Liz, you'll have to say how many years now, but
2008.
2008. She is an amazing person, intelligent, and I can't even say enough about you as a veterinarian, but passionate, I think would probably describe you the best in my words. So welcome. And we hope you all enjoy the information tonight. Pest resilience in your pet, or pest management and your pet from a holistic standpoint.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. That was so sweet, Dr. Sue. I'm excited to be here sharing this with you guys. I have done my best to make this jam-packed with data that you can utilize. So there's going to be a lot of it, and I want you to pick and choose what works for your family and your pet family. And hopefully if there's anything that comes up, we can address questions at the end. But I'm going to jump in there. We're going to get a little dark first, but then we're going to come back up with lots of options to help make your pet more resilient. So we'll just jump into it. So first, I just want to get some stuff out of the way. I have a lot of my colleagues, and we kind of clash head to head. Oh, Liz, you know, you say, well, be cautious about chemicals and chemical pesticides in your pet. That will be part of tonight's lecture. And I just want to say, I'll say, well, you know, your body's made of chemicals. You can't be allergic to chemicals. Okay, I'm just going to say, I'm not just talking about chemicals. I'm talking about synthetic chemicals and toxic synthetic chemicals specifically. And many of them do happen to be herbicides and pesticides. You know, cidal is just something to destroy. It's in the title of the word itself. And there are lots of chain reactions that happen that we don't always see the first time we study something, and we learn as it's applied in real life. And so the data I'm sharing you is data that's being learned, but we're not circling back to these products and saying, we need to be more cautious with them. So tonight I'm just kind of putting it out there. I'm not pointing my fingers at any one particular product, but just more about the whole picture and how all of these synthetic / toxic chemicals, even used in little bits, how they add up and how they can cause problems. Okay, so let's just put that semantics aside, and we're just going to be talking more about how the toxic accumulation leads to some of these products, which attracts parasites and allow these problems to continue. So we'll jump to the next slide. So having said that, for my veterinary friends, I'm going to say, yes, I totally realize how amazing some of these chemical pesticides are. I worked on the South Side for 20 years. Please, I've seen the pesticide-ridden puppy who was so overburdened with worms that no amount of garlic would have saved him because he couldn't process it. He had to have that panicure. He had to have the multiple dewormings. I've seen the hookworm patient that's actually anemic from hookworms. So he's not processing any herb either. He needs that out and gone. He needs a chemical pesticide. Same thing with some certain situations. You guys know I really promote using more natural flea and tick repellents, but sometimes you've got a hunting dog that's going to go deep woods, that's going south. So we're going to talk about using certain products that work better for that patient over others that are chemical pesticides, or the mangy puppy. So I'm not saying there's not a place for these things, but we have to think about the broader picture and not just these acute situations. So what I've seen in my practice since I've started practicing integrative medicine, when I've identified that a certain product that was used regularly, and again, we're talking about some of the synthetic pesticides, the flea and tick and heartworm, when I have identified with the owner, and we've done some digging, and we say, wait, I think this product might be part of the problem. I've seen seizures resolve or dramatically reduce. I've seen liver enzymes go down. Madison's living proof of it. We stopped her, I'm embarrassed to say, it was her heartworm. And the proof was in the pudding, and we have a whole spreadsheet of watching those numbers, and that was super exciting to me. And we know that there were only a few things we shifted. So again, she's just one of many cases. I've seen itching resolve. I've seen digestion improve. I have people tell me, gosh, every month that I gave it to her for a week, she'd be off with her digestion. Okay, let's stop and see what happens for 3 months. Wow, no digestion problems. Chronic wounds that lick granulomas that either improve and or resolve. And then finally, just sometimes just processing these products is just challenging for the patients. And I've seen that, just taking that patient that was improving with nutrition, and then you kind of say, let's back off during the wintertime and just see how he does when we're not using the products. And then just that one little more thing, gosh, he's more energetic. So I've seen that side of it too. So I've seen both. That's why tonight I was saying that it's really a very personal decision and a personal situation with what your pet can handle and what's going on in your environment and your situation. So now we got that out of the way. So I'm not trying to vilify any one topic. Again, tonight's lecture will be about how we can make the best effort to get our pets to attract less parasites and enhance their resilience to them. And again, we're going to be talking about toxin reduction and things like that, and how we can manage those pests in ways that are not so disruptive to animals, the risk of toxic overload. Okay. So specifically, it's going to be broken down in 3 categories. I want to say right away, for those of you who are looking for that list of like, okay, I want the list of supplements that I throw into the diet. I want to know how many cloves of garlic, or does apple cider vinegar really do it? I do have an article at the end for those people who want that information. There's a couple great articles that I really liked that I thought were succinct. So for those, that's there for you. But we're really going to be talking more on the preventative side. What makes the animals less attractive to these parasites? Or when they do have challenges, how can we get their body clearing them? How can they be more resilient and help eliminate the the pests, so that they don't have such a reliance on the chemicals? So we'll be talking about how the toxic load of the pet has a huge correlation with the parasite load. We'll talk about some tips and tricks to reduce toxic load and options for alternatives to the chemical pesticides. So there'll be a mention about garlic, but it'll be more about other ways. And then lastly, some allies that we don't think about, and allies of pest resistance, what I call it, drainage pathways. If any of my clients have heard me just hammer how we need to keep these pathways of our body open, we need to keep the digestive tract open so that the colon can eliminate. Signs of constipation and diarrhea are not healthy pathways that eliminate. The urination, you have to have good urination, have to have good hydration, have to have those kidneys working, have to have a healthy stomach to burn up those parasites, and just the overall foundation. So those are kind of the 3 main categories we're going to hit tonight. So you know where we're going, okay? All right. So if you didn't get it already, again, toxic load, toxic load, toxic load. That's where we're going to start. And when you have more toxic load, you have more inflamed tissue, which makes it more attractive to parasites and the decreased ability to clear them. And when you reverse that effect, you get the enhanced overall wellness so that you can significantly reduce the parasite attraction. So just to get an idea of when I talk about toxic, what do I mean by toxic load? I was blown away when I started looking into it, because I've been to several lectures and they always say, oh, there's 20,000 plus chemicals out there, 60,000 plus chemicals. Well, up to date, we're actually up to 86,000 toxic chemicals registered by the EPA today. And that's actually not a complete count. That's only what's on the Toxic Substances Control Act that's required by the EPA that was started back in 1975, I believe. And this is the link to it. But that doesn't even include, if you look on the right side, it doesn't even include pesticides, food and drug additives, cosmetics, tobacco, all those things. That's not even on the list. So how much larger is that list even? So if you think about just how many products are out there, it's no wonder that we have such a high toxic load, not only in our pets, but ourselves. So we have to think about, that's why I say, I'm not just picking on pesticides that are used on cats and dogs. I'm saying it's the whole picture. And sometimes it's these pesticides that push our pets in over the edge. So again, these are links if you guys want to look. If you want to get a little depressed, don't, I would say the other way around. If you don't want to get depressed, don't look at these links. So that that is actually just the external toxin list. So if you look at this picture, yes, it's a human photo, drawing, but you get the idea of what they're trying to convey in this picture. So when you look at it, we just discussed the external. So we talked about chemical toxins, pesticides, cleaning agents, all those chemicals that are registered. We also talked about chemicals that we're exposed to on that list, right? We didn't talk about it, but what they're including in that list are food preservatives, things like that affect digestion, cleaning products that are toxic, skin absorptions. Those are all the things that are on that list I just showed you, including pollutants by industrial manufacturing. So we're talking about three or four of the items on the list. That doesn't include the toxins that you naturally produce or that a mammal's body naturally produces. We produce toxins inside, whether it be mold, mycotoxins, whether it be internally produced toxins from food sensitivities or intolerances, stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, that actually can be viewed by the body as a toxic effect. And then lastly, self-administered toxins, things that we intentionally put on our body, alcohol, smoking, drugs. Now, great dogs don't drink. Well, most of them don't, but sadly, many of them are exposed to secondhand smoke. And in the veterinary world, we actually call it third-hand smoke for dogs, because not only are they breathing what's just circulating the air when someone's smoking in a room, they get the third-hand smoke, which is the stuff that settles to the ground. And then not only does it settle to the ground and they get more of it, guess what they do? They lick themselves clean. So now they're absorbing it. And oh, by the way, they don't shower at the end of the day or at the start of the day like we do. They just sit in it. So they continue to absorb. So there's a lot of different research articles that about the amount of toxin level is significantly higher in our pets just by their lifestyles, where they're located in our homes, and how they live their lives. So, when you look at this, the body toxic load for a human, it's even worse for a dog or cat. So I just want you to keep in mind. So if I haven't scared you already, I'm sorry. So I kind of jumped ahead a little bit. Here's this slide here. And like I was saying, that depending on the articles you read, some articles say they have twice the toxin loads, and some actually say they have 17 times the amount of toxins that we do, the pets have than we do. And to add to what I was just discussing, not only the third-hand smoke effect I was talking about, but the higher exposure to outdoor chemicals. We go outside when we walk in the yards that everyone's sprayed their herbicides and things to make their lawns look perfectly green. We're walking with shoes most of the time. They're not. They walk through those lawns or on the sidewalks that are equally sprayed, and then they lick their feet clean. And again, back to the licking the coats and not showering. Then their lifestyle habits of what they consume, indiscriminate and purposeful eating. How many little kids do you know just sit and chew a plastic item? Well, I shouldn't say that. We intentionally give our dogs plastic toys to chew on, nylabones, old water bottles, things like that. And that's not something that a child's encouraged to chew on. So animals, by nature, we just kind of let them do what they do. And because of the things that are available commercially, they're exposed to a lot more plastics. Their bodies are smaller, so they can't handle as much of a toxic load as we can. So just by default, even if they had a lesser amount, they're still getting too much for their own body size. And there have been several papers that have been linked to specific type of cancers due to many of these type of toxins that are in their lifestyle. Specifically, the Forever Dog had a citation from Dr. Karen Becker and Rodney Habib about exposure to lawn pesticides, specifically those applied by professional lawn care companies, raise the risk of canine malignant lymphoma by as much as 70%. And so, I mean, there's evidence out there that our pets are toxic, and we have to stop and think about some of these some of these lifestyle habits, then we can make small changes to help that, which we'll talk about later. And I know I've had my colleagues say, well, I disagree with you, Liz, because of the simple fact that there are papers on XYZ of the safety of this product, that it's safe for this kind of plastic because it's non-BPA and this is safe. Look at this paper here. And what I tell them is that test is only as good as the number of observations made, the length of the time the test is run, the number of test subjects looked at, and the variables accounted for. And so when you have a lot of these tiny little studies, they're just blips, they're just 8 studies or 8, how can you say, 8 animals that are studied, 16, 20. Look at a lot of these one-off studies and they're very small, or they're looking for a very succinct amount of data. They're not looking at the big picture. And the best way I can describe why this is a problem is an analogy that someone gave. It was a Dr. William Halperin. He gave a really good analogy. He said, the public health approach to looking at toxicity is basically like sticking a bunch of blind men in a room with an elephant. One blind man might look at the tail and say, oh, this is a rope. And another blind man might look at the trunk and say, oh, this is a tree. And another one might look at a leg and say, oh, this is a stump. But they're all looking at an elephant. You have to have the bigger picture. So you need oftentimes more time. You need more studies. You need more participants. You can't have this reactive approach the way we tend to do, that we just look at one thing and then we react to that one thing and then we react to this thing. So the public health approach, and I say public health because, obviously most of our studies are geared towards people, but animals are part of those studies too. And it all falls under the same kind of study of public health, that, we need to look at more extended studies and accept the new data as it evolves. And I think we're just not doing enough of that. So just to get back into the parasite. So like I said we're going to get big. We're going to start big and talk about some of the not nicer things. But now we're going to get specific to parasites, because we could have a conversation about a million different health related subjects. But tonight we're going to talk about parasites. So of all the toxic products that we look at, we find that there is a correlation with heavy metals, specifically in pets. And so for those of you who don't know what heavy metals are, I put a description on the page for you. But basically, it's the heavier elements in the periodic table. And the most common or the most toxic are arsenic, cadmium, chromium, lead, and mercury. Those are considered the top of 5 greatest concern. So much so that they've taken mercury out of vaccines. They've looked at, lead is very, you have lead tests now at even Home Depot that you can test your paint. So there is a lot of attention on these heavy metals, both in the human and animal world. But what I found interesting when I started looking up like the correlations of parasites, what kind of toxins attract parasites, I found a lot of articles on using parasites to judge the toxic load of the environment, because they found that parasites had a significant concentration of heavy metals in their body. And so there are a lot of scientists that are using parasite quantitation to determine how toxic the environment is. But I thought to myself, shouldn't we take that data and ask ourselves, well, why is that? Are they attracted to the heavy metal? Is it that the heavy metal causes inflammation inside the body, so it makes it easier for them to thrive, and they're just consuming the heavy metal as a side effect? What is it? And I just couldn't find enough information out there, but I do feel like any of those possibilities is true. And I would like to see more information on that. But in any case, we know that there's some kind of correlation between heavy metals and parasite loads, and the two coexist very highly together. So I kind of skipped through this slide, but here's a nice little snippet of a video by Dr. Klinghardt. If any of you know Dr. Klinghardt, he's an amazing doctor who's put together a lot about kinesiology and natural medicine, and he does a lot of parasite, or he promotes parasite cleansing and talks about the relationship between parasites in the body. And he actually specifically talks about how parasites feed off diseased tissue and how they love the disturbed flesh, and therefore they're attracted to places in the body where heavy metals and chemicals reside because they disturb the flesh. He talks about sorry guys. He mentions in one of his lectures how initially, oftentimes the body will welcome a parasite to reduce the heavy metal load. So there is some discussion about that. Does that play a part on why when there's a lot of heavy metals, it allows more parasites to take place. He also talks about initially, like I said, it seems to help the body, but once then you have an overwhelming of parasites, now you have heavy metals and now you have parasites too. So you might get temporary relief as a host, but then all of a sudden you have more disease because you have an overwhelming amount of parasites. So there's a whole correlation there as well. So when I was talking about, so what can we do about that? You know, there's only so much we can do living in an industrial world. We can't live in a bubble. But there are succinct actions that you can take that I feel can make a big difference. So for one thing is that you can reduce intentional heavy metals that can be very concentrated and can cause disease in your pet or further imbalances. So in my practice, we encourage people when they have to get their rabies vaccine to ask for the mercury-free rabies vaccine. As I said, they've identified in the human field that we're going to take mercury out of human vaccines, but for some reason they haven't done it for pets, which is quite a disappointment. But thankfully, Mariel has a mercury-free vaccine, so that way at least you can ask for that. And if you can't find it from your vet, then you need to find another vet. You can also look at reducing exposure to aluminum. Aluminum is a heavy metal, and it is found in the adjuvants of vaccines. It's intentionally put in there to get the immune response to be greater and higher, so you get those antibodies against the virus or bacteria that you're trying to vaccinate against. So it's intentional, but in some of these patients who have dysregulated immune systems or allergy issues, it ramps it up too much, and so then you get more inflammation, and guess what? You're more attracted to parasites. So when you can avoid a vaccine, such as using a titer for distemper parvo, and a titer is a blood test that you can take to see if the patient still has antibodies that are necessary for that vaccine, then you can say, oh, I don't even need this vaccine. So when you can ask for a titer over the actual vaccine, because it's going to be a lot more challenging to ask your veterinarian which ones don't have aluminum. Most veterinarians wouldn't be able to answer that. So I don't advise clients to ask about that. I just say, try to be succinct about how you vaccinate and when you vaccinate, and reduce it, unnecessary vaccinating when possible. Using supplement support after the vaccination to help support the elimination. The rest of this lecture will talk about a lot of foundational ways, but a very succinct way would be using milk thistle or whatever product your holistic veterinarian has recommended you use to help bind, eliminate these metals. Super easy ones like check your dishes your pets eat from. Do you have lead-based ceramics? Are you using leftover aluminum pie dishes, because they're easy and sometimes people just like to toss them, but those are all really easy ways to remove aluminum and other things from your pet's diet, because over time these pets are, when they dig in their food, they're excited, their teeth are scratching the plates, and believe it or not, they are getting particles of these heavy metals if they're eating out of containers like that. You can also wipe the underside of your pet after walking outside. You know, you're getting the heavy metals and lead that comes from the exhaust of a truck that just went by and that you didn't even know was there because it happened 5 minutes ago and your pet walks through it. Well, a simple wipe of their feet can make a huge difference. As we say, the solution to pollution is dilution. So just wiping it off so there's less of it. Drinking water. Even though Chicago water is, most of you have Chicago water if you're in this area. Well, I guess, we're talking to Milwaukee folks as well. But you might have Lake Michigan water and you might have city water, but some of these older pipes are lead pipes, and that's well known. And so I always recommend using filtered water or spring water, never just straight tap water, even if you just use a carbon filter. Something that people don't think about, silver colloid supplements. They're a big hit because silver is a great antibacterial, and it's a natural thing that you can use, and it can work beautifully. But I have some people get carried away. They use it as toothpaste. They use it for cleaning their dog's feet when they come in from outside. And I say, great, you're wiping the feet, but now you're putting another metal on. And even though it's not technically a heavy metal, it's a metal close and upper in the atomic weight. And I do find that sometimes when I do my alternative testing, that comes up, and we need to say, let's back down on that. And then last one, this is one that I found fascinating when I was learning about nutritional medicine, is that confirm you are feeding a well-balanced meal with bioavailable trace minerals. especially for those of you who are making your own diet. Sometimes we get lazy, I get it. You know, you leave a couple ingredients out, like, oh, I ran out of that multivitamin mineral mix. And before you know it, it's been 2 months and you haven't had it in the diet. Super important you get those minerals in, because guess what minerals are? Minerals are actually metals, minerals, and they're very similar in how the body interacts with them. So when the body is mineral deficient, guess what it's going to do? It's going to hold on to those heavy metals tighter because it just wants any mineral. So the more appropriate and better balanced you have the trace minerals in your pet's body, the less they'll hold on to heavy metals and other toxic metals. So that is so important for you guys who are making your dog's food at home, or say drinking distilled water. You need to be adding those trace minerals. Okay, guys? Oh, and that's the one I have up there, IVI blend. That's something that Dr. Sue introduced me to. It's one of the more whole food based, all-in-one vitamin mixes that I really like and has really been testing well for the patients. So I really encourage people to look at that if they're making their own diets at home. All right. So the other way, and this is, I'm gonna get on my little soapbox, guys. I'm sorry. Be part of the solution. We can reduce overall pesticide use. So I believe one of my clients is on here tonight, and she said something the other day. I was like, that's brilliant. How about if you're using pesticides, if you have to, for whatever reason, just use it in your front lawn, not in your back. Who cares about your back? You're the only one seeing it back there. So, you know, that cuts 50% out right there, even in your area. There are also alternatives. If you feel like you can go all in and not use chemical pesticides or herbicides, there are great websites. This one here, beyondpesticides.org, is a wonderful organization, nonprofit, trying to encourage not using pesticides in our children's playgrounds and public areas. And they have a whole wealth of information on what you can do on alternatives to not use those pesticides out in the environment. I personally love a product called Garlic Barrier. It's wonderful for mosquitoes, and I can testify it works. My father used to live on a farm on the south side of Chicago, 8 acres, and it was kind of swampy, and he would just get eaten alive. But when I started using this product, it's great. Of course, you have to reapply it, but not as often as you think. And I just blown away how well it worked. Removing standing water to reduce mosquitoes. That's another thing, you know, not only about ways to actually repel or kill them, how about just not giving them breeding grounds? And those are, you know, it seems like, well, that's a little thing, but all these little things add up. Attracting bats and birds that eat insects, super fun way. Benign neglect of insects damaging plants. That to me, I have to admit, that can be hard. My husband and I just bought a very expensive oak tree a couple seasons ago, and I was out in the yard the other day and I saw all these holes in the leaves, and I thought, oh my gosh, I so want to run to the store right now and just get a pesticide and spray whatever's eating my beautiful oak tree. But I'd be a huge hypocrite, and I can't do that. That's just not right. I can't do it. But I sat there and I looked on my phone. I went back and forth. And then finally, I'm like, I'm just going to go in the garden center and talk to the guy. I took it in, and the gentleman at the store was wonderful. He's like, don't forget, oak trees are actually food to a lot of butterflies and other animals that we want. And he's like, and this particularly happens to be this, I can't remember what insect it was. He's like, but this is a good guy. We want this insect. He's like, let him eat your oak leaf a little bit. He's like, and I guarantee you it's just going to be a few leaves. And the gentleman was right. I let it go, and that was it. And I felt good about what I did. I didn't react. I didn't jump and say, oh, you know. So sometimes just not doing anything, just letting it be. The other one is reading the instructions of these chemicals that you put. I'll give you another perfect example. My own situation. My husband has grapevines, and there were some spots of mold, and we hadn't been treating because, of course, his wife's a little intense about not using chemicals in the back lawn. He said, oh, I don't want to lose my grapes. I said, okay, honey, go ahead. You have to be you. I'm just going to look away. I started spraying away, and I said, wait a minute. I said, just stop for a minute. Let's ask the nice gentleman at the store. Well, I went, and he's just like, well, actually, you could do that, but now is the wrong time to do it. One treatment of this antifungal, I think he was using copper, is not going to do it. He's like, you need 3 treatments, so therefore, it's a moot point. So it was all for nothing. Thankfully, he stopped. But my point is, if you are going to use them, at least use them right. Don't just use them impulsively. And lastly, back to that dilution is the solution to pollution. So wiping those paws, hosing things down, just keeping things as clean off of you and your pet as you can. Okay. All right, I'll get off my soapbox. So now this is more for you guys as pet owners with your pets, not just being part of the solution with your backyards. There are alternative ways that you can use the current pharmaceutical pesticides to reduce the toxic load. Dr. Karen Becker has several lovely articles. These are just some snippets that I started with back in 2008. I'm not going to lie, I was super nervous to make these recommendations because I thought, oh, am I going to create resistance by not using these chemicals exactly as they're supposed to be used? Because they say if you partially use them and then you get pests that come back because you didn't kill everybody off, are they going to be more resilient? But we're finding that more and more of these chemicals, regardless of how they're being used, we're still getting pests that are starting to be resistant to them regardless. So I've decided that being more conservative, even if we're not using these pesticides exactly the label, I guess I'm kind of being a little hypocrite because I just told you to follow the label when you're applying it to your lawn, but you don't necessarily have to follow the label when you're applying it to your pet. And here's why, because we're going back to that toxic load on your pet. The label for the pets, for the products, the flea, tick, heartworm, they want you to use it once a month, every 3 or whatever it says, right as rain. But I want you guys to dig a little deeper. And what I mean by that is that if you look at these labels, a lot of the products actually last 45 days, 55 days. They picked 30 days because you get better client compliance, and that's a month, and it's easy to remember. Okay, at the first of the month when I pay my mortgage or whatever, I'm going to give them that heartworm, I'm giving them that flea and tick. But actually, each product has data on exactly the length of how long it can be used. So on average, we find a lot of the heartworm products last 45 days instead of 30. So you'll see one of Dr. Becker's recommendations is instead of using your monthly heartworm every 30 days, use it every 45. Another one is instead of using it all year, just use it from the spring to the first frost. Because of course, heartworm is transmitted by mosquitoes. So if there's no mosquitoes, they can't be transmitted. You can also make sure you're just more attentive to the environment, vacuuming daily, keeping things clean, washing the bedding. That reduces the debris where fleas can hatch and parasites can live. So being more diligent about that. And then regular grooming. One of the tedious parts about going natural is that it's not a one and done thing. You can't just apply it and just walk away. But even then, nowadays, again, like I said, we're finding more and more pets are still getting breakthroughs of parasites, even when they have these products on. But in any case, back to when you're doing more natural modalities of using the pesticide remedies, you have to be more diligent. You have to stay on top of it more. And you want to use all those tips and tricks to make sure you're staying on top of it. I think two of my favorite little tips that again came from a client, one specifically, like for ticks, some people get overwhelmed, like, how am I going to find those guys? Taking a lint roller with a sticky lint roller after you go for a walk and going in the areas where they tend to collect more, around the ears, around the axilla, the armpits, inside the groin, and just running it, because usually they're still walking, they're still moving, and even if not, you're going to be able to catch one or two. So you'd be surprised just using some simple tools. The second favorite one I had that I was taught years ago, just coming out of school, was when you're looking for fleas. People are like, well, how the heck am I going to find a flea? Don't even look for the flea. Look for their poop. If you rub a dog down, their poop's going to fall to the ground because the fleas are living on the dog and they poop on the dog. And then when you shake them up, it falls to the ground. You take a wet paper towel and you look up and you wipe it. If you see little rusty reddish black dots, it's probably flea poop because they eat blood, so their poop comes out rusty red. And the way you can really tell is if it's wet, when you press your finger on it and smear it across, it uncoagulates or decoagulates, and then you get a red streak. If it's mud, it'll just stay black or brown. So that's a way to stay on top of monitoring your pet for fleas. In my household, my guy can't tolerate flea prevention, and actually incites problems in his kidney. He has some kidney problems and he'll pee all over the house. So I decided long ago we were going to stick with natural, and he doesn't get the treatment at all, the typical heartworm treatments. And he's gotten fleas once or twice, and we just bathe them, clean the areas. We use diatomaceous earth, and we're good to go. We don't have these infestations. And so earlier when I alluded to fear, I get really tired of hearing that, oh, you have to do this because there'll be 300,000 fleas in your house if you don't use the preventative. That's not necessarily true. If you're being smart about controlling the environment, being cautious, you can manage these situations. So that's all I have to say about that. And then I did say that I was going to get some of these little tips. I didn't want to get into too many of them, but I will give you my favorite products. So of course we have to have something. So if I do want products that I want to at least repel, I'm going to use some of these products here that they tend to do really well by some of my areas. What I tell clients is ask around, because oftentimes different areas respond to different products. Like I have a lot of clients that go to Michigan and they seem to find that Vetri Science, the Vetri Repel for flea and tick mosquito repellent works really well up there over other products. I have a lot of clients that go to Indiana. For some reason, the Dr. Peter Tobias's flea and tick products work really well over there. I don't know why, but it seems that sometimes certain areas have better success with certain products. So don't hesitate to ask around to your fellow holistic friends. Other products that I like a lot are Wonderside flea and tick repellents, Young Living, and you can also check with the companies directly and discuss with your, like again with your vet or your friends that are in this holistic world about what works best. And also too, you do want to check. I will say some of these products have, particularly this essential oil products, will have things that are labeled that are not supposed to be given to cats, particularly because some cats have issues with some essential oils. And when I've checked with the companies, they will say, oh, actually, it's such a small amount, it's inconsequential, but don't overdo it. So with cats, do be careful, even if the product says it's okay and it's essential oil. Follow up with the companies to make sure that they don't have a certain limit on how much to use or whatnot, or why they claim it's okay. But essentially, the companies I've mentioned, I feel, are very aware on proper formulations for their products and doing things the right way. I already mentioned the food grade diatomaceous earth that you can use for fleas and ticks. It basically, for fleas, it dries out the eggs so they can't hatch. So applying that powder can be very helpful in the environment. And some people actually put on their pet, but be careful around their eyes. And there's some other tips there as well. And lastly, one of my favorite products is Amber Technologies HWF Cardiovascular Detox for canines. It's kind of what I use in place of heartworm, even though it's not labeled for that. There's just been a lot of success stories. I will say that in the time since 2008, since I've had the courage to kind of come out of the box and say, hey, maybe some of my pets who are too toxic, can't handle this stuff, shouldn't be on heartworm. Between using all these modalities, using the Amber Technologies, I've actually only had one case ever come down with heartworm, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But so I feel pretty confident that while this is not a true heartworm cidal product, it's a cleanser for the heart, and heartworms live in the heart. So I think that that's why it's a great tool in your toolbox if you're looking at keeping the heart clean and protecting it from heartworms. Oh, well, there's Henry. So, so speaking of Henry, the tie-in here is that one of the ways that when you are doing more natural modalities is that you got to do more work. Like I was saying, you got to check for the fleas, you got to check for the ticks, you got to look. Same thing, you got to look for heartworms. So you do testing more often. So twice a year is best. So if you are going to catch it, if you do have a pet that comes down with it, then you're going to be catching it earlier, so it's easier to treat. Henry, like I said, since 2008, I'm going to knock on wood, has been my only patient to come down with heartworm. Now, he has a lot of conditions. He has megaesophagus. He most likely has IBD, and he's on several medications to manage things. So he is, if he didn't have the spirit he did, and if he didn't have the amazing owner that's such an advocate for him, he'd be a lot worse off. And I think that despite the fact that he was weakened and got heartworm, he bounced back. We muscle test him for some various products, and we put him on a homeopathic for nematodes, and he tested clear several months later. Now, I'm not allowed to say I treated it, because we're not allowed to say that for using supplementations, but miraculously he healed himself. So I was very happy for Henry. He's a wonderful guy. So yeah, so back to just testing more frequently. It's a simple blood test, and again, it can differentiate between early or late infections. Doing poop checks more often. If you're nervous because you're not using the heartworm, because it does have round, depending on which one you're using, it has roundworm, wickworm, hookworm protection. You can just use more. I'm sorry, I apologize. You can use more frequent fecal parasite checks. And here's a fun, interesting fact, and it ties in with the fact that we had a full moon. Check your dog's poop on a full moon, and you'll get more likely to get a better answer if there is something there, because parasites are more active in the full moon. And if you don't know, when you turn your dog's poop or your cat's poop into the veterinarian and submit that sample, they're not actually looking for worms, they're looking for eggs. The parasites are happy inside the body. They're not coming out. They're dumping out their eggs to reproduce and share with the rest of the world. So all you're really seeing in the stool is the eggs. You will see a worm on occasion if there's an overload of worms or if the parasite actually died and came out. But in general, you're just going to see eggs. So if they're not reproducing at the time you turn in the sample, it's going to be a false negative. So all veterinarians know that really one poop sample is never enough to say, we're clear. So we want at least a couple, especially if you have diarrhea and you are suspecting your dog or cat might have contracted parasites, then you want to be careful about that. And you want to make sure you submit a couple samples. And so for those of you who are curious about how is it that they're more active, it has to do with the circadian rhythm and the fact that they actually thrive on serotonin. It stimulates muscles and allows them to move about more freely in the body, and it helps them to reproduce and increase their ability to feed. Pretty fascinating stuff. So sorry to gross anyone out, but you can, and I will say this is accepted in the Western world. There are plenty of emergency doctors, human and animal, who will attest to the craziness that happens on a full moon coming out of mammalian bodies. So FYI, this is part of the more testing. If you just want to make your test as effective as possible, check it the morning after a full moon. All right, this is one of my most interesting slides, and I want to say that it's going to be a little bit controversial, but again, I'm going to put the data out there and you guys decide for yourselves. When I started talking to people about, maybe you shouldn't use heartworm prevention, or maybe you should use it less, I knew I had to be very intentional in how I shared the data and how I let people make the decision. Because of course, heartworm is a terrifying disease. If your dog gets it, it could be lethal. And if not lethal, expensive to treat. And it can come with complications when you're treating as you kill off those parasites. It can cause thromboembolism in the lungs. So this is not like anything flippant that I just say, just take them off it. I'm very serious about it. So I let people decide for themselves, and I say, well, what's your risk tolerance for this? And so we go to the American Heartworm Society. They're the official go-to for any veterinarian, traditional or holistic. And their last updated incidence chart was in 2019. And so for our area, it looks like if you're in Chicagoland, but I guess up by Milwaukee, you guys have some concentrated areas too. But you can see it's anywhere from 1 to 5 cases of heartworm per clinic per year, or 6 to 25, and in more concentrated areas, 26 to 50. So when I look at that, I'm like, oh, that sounds terrible, especially the 26 to 50. But out of how many? What percentage is that? So like I said, I'm all about the data. So I tried to find out what do they mean by per clinic, reporting clinic. So I broke down what it would be like to be an average clinic number, and it came down to less than 1-2%. I said, well, that can't be right, because that sounds really low. I just feel like there's such a fear factor introduced to this topic that it has to be higher than a 1% chance of your dog getting heartworm. So I went to my old clinic, La Par on the south side, and I got some stats from them. I asked them, would you mind sharing me your heartworm numbers? And I tried to break down the math so it was as unbiased as possible. So they pulled their last 12 months, and they had run, instead of running the whole hospital, because I said not every animal that comes in here gets a heartworm test, so that's not fair. So let's go ahead and compare the numbers to just animals that are tested for heartworms. So they had, in the past 12 months, 3,555 heartworm tests collected. 11 were heartworm positive. So 11. Okay, so what does that break down? So 11 by 3,555 is way less than 1%. It's 0.0030942. Okay, well, that just seems even lower. So I said to myself, well, maybe that's not right, because now we're just comparing the patients that, let me think, how can I say this? Maybe all those animals are protected with heartworm prevention because they're all going to the hospital. The veterinarian's recommending to every client. So maybe that number's skewed because they're actually all on heartworm, and that's why it's low. So I said, okay, let me look into compliance rates. What is the real compliance? How many people are truly using and purchasing heartworm products properly? So depending on what study, it's anywhere from 24 to 52% compliant, which to me, I was shocked. I thought that was shockingly low, but then I come to think about it and I think, yeah, heartworm products can get expensive. It's easy to forget. I get it. So if I did that math and I multiplied the 0.003 by that, then it comes out to 0.01 or 0.005. So again, still less than 1%. So for me, I'm okay with that risk. Now, for my office manager who helped me run those numbers, her dog actually got a heartworm. And she looked at those numbers statistically, but she said, you know what? I experienced it. I don't want it. So again, it's different for everybody and what their risk tolerance is and what happens. And so I think that it's a super personal decision, and you have to do what feels right. If you go along with me and say, Dr. Cutright, I can do this, yay. But if you say, Dr. Cutright, I just can't, I'm going to respect that. And we're going to work on using milk thistle after you use the heartworm product. But again, like I said at the beginning, for those of you who were around before we started, I just want to give you guys the data so you can make the decisions for yourself. I'm not trying to skew any numbers or make anyone uncomfortable, okay? All right, so having said all of that, if you do look at me and say, okay, I think I want to try to not use heartworm or use less or whatever you want to do, or flea and tick, I'm just kind of like all these things are kind of lumped into one. You need to make sure you're asking yourself these questions. You need to make sure you say, if my dog got heartworm, would I feel bad? I mean, of course you feel bad, but would I feel terribly guilty and say I did the wrong thing? And some people need to see that how much better their dogs do off of it to be the evidence to say, you know what, I want quality of life and I'll treat it if it happens. Or I want him to be less itchy and I'll treat it if it happens. So you just, again, you have to kind of put yourself in the scenarios. Do you practice that kind of lifestyle? Do you believe in, excessive chemicals are a concern? Do you feel your pet has demonstrated chemical sensitivity? So this is my little list that I tell people, kind of walk through it. Like, make sure you're asking yourself these questions before you jump in and do that, because you don't want to be on the other side and be reactive and feeling guilty and trying to defend yourself to your veterinarian if your dog gets fleas or ticks, and you have to explain why you're, doing the alternative ways you are. So just make sure you ask yourself these questions and be at peace with your decision, whatever decision you make. And that's my little guy. He's shaved down. That's another thing. Shaving is way easier to check for fleas. All right. So I've talked enough about the overall toxicity, and we're going to kind of start dipping into physiologically how we can help, not just on the exterior reduction of the products. This is, again, another human drawing. Sorry, I just couldn't find the equivalent for people, and you don't, the equivalent for animals, and you don't want me drawing pictures for you guys. But so again, I'm going back to that toxicity load. You have a healthy mammalian body on the left, and you're getting more toxins, you're starting to build disease and inflammation, and then finally you're overwhelmed on the far right. So tapping into the systems that help you keep that load down. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the lymphatics, the lungs, the kidney, the detox pathways, the bowel, like I mentioned earlier, okay? So this is one of my favorite topics, and I'm sorry if I beat this one into the ground. And we will have a separate lecture in a couple months on this. But again, when I started talking at the earlier points, it is so important that you pay attention to your dog, and you can, as a pet owner, determine where he might have problems with elimination. And I don't just mean poop, lymphatics. For instance, if your vet continually says, his lymph nodes are always a little bit bigger here. Huh, okay. And then you just go about your business. This is a drainage problem. This is part of the whole system. What can you do to help that? If your vet said, you know what, he needs a dental and you've been ignoring it for 3 years because you're worried about the anesthesia or who knows what, you might be surprised that just cleaning the teeth will shrink those lymph nodes and take the stress off that so they can work on other things than just the bacteria coming from the tartar. Sometimes it's as simple as a dental. So there are other ways to think about the overall picture. So looking at that, looking at the bowels, like sometimes people will say, oh, my dog's poops harder all the time. No big deal. It's easier to pick up. I like it that way. No, that's a sign of constipation. Things aren't moving out. So you need to address, well, am I giving a moist food? Moisture makes it easier for the bowels to function. They keep hydrated. Am I giving an appropriate food? If I'm making the dog's food, am I putting too much carbs in it because it's easier and cheaper that way? Or am I buying this other food? Am I using too much kibble or poor quality kibble? Any number of things, but you can always take a step up, meaning that, and you don't have to do everything. And of course, Dr. Sue and I are going to promote fresher diets and frozen foods and things like that. But at the end of the day, even if you're at a kibble, you can make kibble better by adding water to it. You can top it with greens. You can add cans. You can do a fresher food 2 or 3 days a week of a food that might be a little bit more expensive that you can't afford 7 days a week, but you can afford it 2 days a week. So think about that when you're looking at your dogs, what's going in and what's going out. Bladder, that's a huge one. For my guy, he wasn't urinating properly. And we were able to narrow down that he has significant protein allergies that affect his kidneys. So he can only have rabbit, fish, and turkey, and that's it. And it started with just rabbit, but we've been building his gut, and now we've built it up to 2. And so I know that when I feed him appropriately and I've addressed some of his other physiological needs, his kidneys work better. Like I said, we don't use the heartworm or flea and tick because it affects the kidneys. So looking at him, instead of just saying, oh, he pees a lot, like, no, you should do your due diligence, have your veterinarian check the urine. Is that a normal concentration, or is that just him being a stinker because he's not castrated? So we're able to tell, yeah, no, that urine's abnormal. So even using your traditional vet to rule some of these things out, even if they don't talk in the language of routes of elimination and drainage pathways, you can still get a lot of data from your traditional testing on your specific dog and what you can do for helping them eliminate. And the last one's a silly one, but breathing. Going back to that third smoke effect that applies to everything, any particle that's introduced in your home. So just being cognizant of your air quality and where they are when we're exposing them to things, even when we're cleaning. Like maybe you shouldn't have them in the room with you. Maybe you make sure if you are using certain products and watch his reaction. Does he cough every time you pull out your cleaner? Well, is it the cleaner or is it your dog? If you're using vinegar, probably not the cleaner. Maybe I need to look into that. So just these are things that you can observe about your pet to see if these avenues are working properly. And again, we'll get into that if you guys want to come back around in a couple months, and we're going to have a whole fun lecture just about that. And we're going to dive into more explanations, but those are just some snippets. But I know I better speed up because we're getting close to 8 o'clock and I'm not quite done. I don't want to lose you guys yet. So, but again, the take-home message from this is address your pet's elimination pathways, and you can do it. You can work with your veterinarian to look at the issues that may be holding them back from eliminating toxins. Consider food and life habits that support the pathways of elimination. So I kind of already touched on this, so I just wanted this to be on a page for you guys. Like I said earlier, this is more about if you want to go back and look at your notes, look at the slides, but moist food, like I said, reducing the processed foods. Parasites actually feed off of sugars, and kibble diets are high in carbohydrates, which means it increases the sugars, which feeds those pathogens. Using low glycemic fruits. I have a lot of people that love bananas, and they'll give their dogs bananas or apples. And yes, those are beautiful things, but if you do have a dog that has parasites and you're trying to get rid of them, not a good idea because it's a high glycemic sugar. So any way you can sneak in trying to starve those parasites is a way you can do it. High fiber vegetables can be really good. Pumpkin, inulin, things like that. Again, that helps that elimination pathway. Watching antibiotic use, because that can damage the microbiome, the bacteria and the healthy yeast in the gut, which are directly responsible for elimination. back to the filtered water. Sorry, guys, I'm going to keep hammering that. Filtered water, filtered water, filtered water. And then and this is where you do need to work with a holistic vet, or at least someone who can educate you on things that are specific to your vet, talking about digestive enzymes, garlic, which is a great drainage product and opens up things and can change some of the chemistry in the body. Hispanic black radish, I call that like a little bristle brush for your intestines, keeping it clean. Antranex, a wonderful product that's basically defatted liver. It's wonderful for the sinuses and the upper airway. Fenugreek, a lot of nursing mothers use it. Guess what? It's great for upper body glands, clearing those lymphatics, and appropriate antibiotics. These are all worth looking at. And if, obviously these are my favorite products, but you might have supplement lines that you like and that can fit those categories that I mentioned earlier. So just make sure you're using all your tools. Okay, guys? Stomach health. This is another one. I know people might be like, wait, what? I thought you were holistic. I thought you're all under raw food. But I'm going to say this. We have to look at also specifically stomach digestion, because stomach is one of the first lines of defense against parasites outside the skin. When your dog ingests parasites, the stomach acid should be able to burn it up. But we have a lot of dogs that are on antacids, their digestion isn't quite right. And so that's how those parasites can get right on through. They sail right on through. So if your dog's belching a lot, or they're on antacids, or there's regurgitation, you may want to look at talking to someone about, do they need, betaine hydrochloride, do you need Zypan to help them with protein digestion in the stomach? And there's lots of things. I would love to sit and talk about how to figure that out. Maybe we'll make that another lecture, but you do have to pay attention to your dog's stomach digestion specifically, which brings me to the next point. As much as I like raw food, it's not for every dog, especially some of my older dogs. They just don't make enough hydrochloric acid anymore to burn up parasites or burn up some of the bacteria. And honestly, a lot of the raw diets out there are pasteurized. They're not even really raw. So I don't get too worried, but those of you that are straight up cooking raw food, or not cooking, preparing raw food for your pets, if they're older or you're having parasite issues, I recommend lightly cooking. I already mentioned the antacids, and I do think that doing regular cleanses, adding that into the food can be helpful too. And this little link to Dogs Natural magazine has a great little list of certain things you can add, pumpkin seed, and again, they talk about garlic and other things, and how to just periodically do overall parasite cleansing in general to help that stomach handle those things. And then I'm kind of reiterating the fun foods to consider specific to stomach health. Pineapple. Okay, so I'm going a little against my high glycemic, because pineapple has more sugars, but it has an enzyme called bromelain, which can boost digestion and kill parasites. It can also reduce pro-inflammatory cytokines that lead to colon inflammation. So that I make an exception for pineapple, and it's just a fun treat to give your dog. So keep those little fun things in mind. But yeah, you definitely want to pay attention to stomach health when it comes to parasite. So in a nutshell, keeping in mind all that foundational support to keep their bodies cleaner, to keep them more resilient, to make it so that they can manage the things that they're regularly exposed to is really what I want you guys to think about. I just want you to think outside the box than you've been traditionally told. And if all else fails, just get chickens. They'll eat every insect in sight. And I did add at the end of this lecture 2 extra slides that Sue has talked about and keep on coming up in my lectures, what we call the foundational. Again, it kind of hammers that clean water, minimally processed food, healthy gut bacteria, yada, yada, yada. It's all on there. So we will attach notes for you guys. But in short, thank you for listening. And I hope I didn't overwhelm you guys. And I appreciate you lending me an ear tonight.
Thank you so much, Liz. That was awesome. I have to say, I mean, I learned some things. I love listening to you lecture because you give such good pearls for all of us. It's just really cool. So
thank you so much.
No, that's great. I don't see much in the chat right now. I know that we're at time. So maybe we should just say good night and thank you all. And we'll look forward to seeing you next month when we will be talking about mushrooms. Yeah. And
All
this
right.
recording will be up on my website by the beginning of the week, and yours too, right, Liz? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. Wonderful. Is that souffle the chicken?
Yes, that's souffle, 1 of 4.
Ah, 1 of 4.
Yeah.
I love it.
He's now much bigger than that.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you guys so much. And Liz, you can stop the recording anytime. We'll see you
All
guys
right,
next time.
great.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you.